back to the main stage. My name is Jonathan McCrea. I'm a science broadcaster and communications consultant with WhipSmart Media. This next panel should be very exciting. It's about big data and where it's going to bring us. We have a fantastic panel for you. Let me please introduce Eoin O'Reilly, a partner Industrial Commercial and Technology Group with EY, Barry James, Analytics Manager with Bank of Ireland, Pauric Sheerin, who's VP Data Science at Pramerica, and Professor Linda Doyle, Professor of Engineering and Director of Connect at Trinity College Dublin. You're all very welcome. So big data, who wants to explain what big data, because it's such a buzzword at the moment. I will start with you, Eoin, because you're the nearest to me. What is big data and why should we care?
Yeah, I mean, good question, Jonathan. My sense of big data is I think we've heard a huge amount of buzz around it over the last couple of years. We're probably on that slightly downward hype curve now, in that, we were rising, and now people are getting a little bit tired of the term. What do we mean by it? Big data is really about really large volumes of data that have a big amount of variety, so not just traditional data we get in databases, but things from social media and elsewhere, and it's data that changes a lot as well. The term big data is often confused. Some people, when they say big data, they also mean the analysis of that big data. Other people just interpret it as it's a huge ton of data and we need to do something with it. So I think what we've seen the last couple of years is big data is coming into the speak and the norm of everyone. I think what we're now starting to see is how do we get more value out of it? How do we analyze it better?
This is an area where we are collecting an enormous amount of information, aren't we, Linda? I mean, all of these Internet of Things devices are being connected on, and we're just being monitored all the time. There's an enormous amount of information going into the cloud, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we're at a kind of interesting cusp where I think a lot of people are used to kind of being monitored by their phones or tracked where they're going, or when they kind of buy stuff in a supermarket, that people know their shopping habits or analyze their credit cards. But we're moving forward now into where that monitoring is kind of being embedded in the environment around you through the Internet of Things. So everywhere you go, for good or for bad, people are keeping an eye on everything we're doing and every movement we make, and that's what's creating these large-scale amounts of data that we take action on.
Pauric, are we collecting too much data, do you think?
I don't know.
Great start.
Yeah, great start. I think we're not collecting too much data. I think we can collect data better than what we're collecting it today. There's a lot of let's get more data. I think what you're seeing is we've got a massive amount of data that's untapped. I mean, there's different studies out there, but somewhere we only actually analyze between 1% and 5% of the data that we collect. And I think it's important to derive value from the data that we have, rather than worry about trying to get out there and collect more data. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to go further with what we already have.
Yeah, I think I read something, an interesting statistic said that we're creating more information every day than a stack of DVDs from here to the moon and back again every single day. And actually that statistic is 3 years old. Yeah. That we were now generating more information than was ever collected in the history of the spoken word and written word every 2 years. Yeah. So I mean, what are we doing with all that information, Barry? I know you want us to put it to good use.
Yeah, so I don't think we are putting it to good use. I feel that small businesses are able to do some amazing things with customers and give them that wow factor, and they do it almost instinctively and out of their heads.
What do you mean?
So sometimes it's really simple things, like when you go to the laundrette, they go, "Oh, Barry, great to see you. I saw your dad here 2 weeks ago." It's just brilliant engagement. It's remembering things, and they do it so easily. The bank that I work in knows an awful lot more about customers than the laundrette knows, and yet we don't seem to get that wow factor. Are we putting all of this data that we're collecting to the best use for the benefit of the customer? Many organizations are collecting data, but with a use case in mind, rather than building a capability around all of the data. So they're not saying, in 5 years, we're going to be in a position to truly ensure that customers benefit from all of this data. Instead, a project comes along, they say, great, we're going to need to collect all that Google Analytics data from our website because we want to do this, or we want to shorten the number of, make fewer the number of clicks from an application for a loan to drawing down that loan.
Yeah.
But is that not
It's
a good
simple.
thing? I mean, like, if we have a use case for it, rather than just going, let's just get all the information in the world and put it somewhere, and then we'll figure out what to do with it.
It is. I think you can't. I would disagree. I think you can't, in the abstract, say I'm just going to collect, for many reasons. I think the first reason is that I think you can't just take data from people and expect that data to sit there and not know what that use is going to be for. I think there's fantastic examples of people using data really, really well. Like, you know, you see in the sports world where they do super analytics of teams, and they can tell right down to the second. They can see patterns that the human wouldn't see, and that's the key thing. You also hear of completely stupid examples where I was listening to somebody during the week kind of praising the idea that this particular company analysed the data from their Wi-Fi system, and they were able to know the footfall outside the shop, and they discovered there was a lot of footfall at night time when the shop was closed, so they should open different hours. And that to me was like, why didn't they look out the window kind of analysis? So I think we're in a point at the moment where there's a lot of fantastic things happening, a lot of stupid things happening with data.
Yeah.
But I do think use cases drive it, and they also drive it because it's a very expensive thing to do to gather the data, and you know, to have the investment from my side and the networks to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that without a use case or something, actually a business reason for doing it. in the
I
first place.
think Barry's
Yeah.
point, just to finish what Barry's saying, I think your point was that it's very much focused on what the bank wants, or very much what the services and companies want, rather than what the customer wants. That was your
Absolutely.
point.
Perhaps, yeah.
But I suppose when I'm saying about building a capability,
Yes, I
it's-
agree with that. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's fine having a use case. So we might have a use case around making it fewer number of clicks from application to a drawdown of a loan, let's say. But we will buy the tool set and employ the people to deliver just that. And that's limited. It lacks that longer term vision.
I think though, I would say though, one of the things I think is fantastic about data science, and I'm not a data scientist and I wish I were, is I actually think the transferable skills in this area are bigger than any other area I've come across. So you can take core capabilities around machine learning, about data analytics, and you can actually, once you're willing to get to know a domain, transfer it into any other domain. So I think there's a generic competency there that you get huge, I think, economies of scale with, unlike some other areas
So-
at the moment.
And I'll just build on kind of what both folks are saying.
Yeah.
I actually think it's important, and this is why I think it's important we've got so many people here. It's about creativity.
Yeah.
Lots of companies have data, but they've got creative people. They often don't have creative people that can also work with data. And so it's that combination that's really critical. I mean, I've seen that same data being sitting around for 10 years with no real value derived out of it. And then you get a creative person with data skills, which effectively, you know, is now what's known as a data scientist. But ultimately, you don't have to be a data scientist. You just got to go out there and learn yourself some basic data skills.
Yeah.
And that's what you find. And just on the Wi-Fi example, I'll actually disagree and say I've heard another example which really wasn't a stupid example of footfall. There was a butcher's shop in London which did just that. They put indicators out to watch footfall going past the shop. Then they worked out that they were getting a lot of footfall between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Well, what was happening was it was in an area where there's lots of bars and pubs. So everyone was coming back from the pub. So then they went to Google Analytics and they looked at what's hot. And it was in kind of a nice part of London, so it was all about pulled pork. And pulled pork was in theme. So they decided that they would start opening up at this time of night and doing pulled pork. Now over half their revenue is coming from that time period. So I think that's an example of where
Yeah.
it was a creative idea, right, to think of, and now suddenly they're making a lot of money out of it.
Yeah.
Owen?
I mean, I think the point on use case is spot on. Actually, if you look at the start of the big data cycle, what an awful lot of organizations did is they went and spent heavy on tech, right? They really said we got to get into this without any real direction,
Yeah.
right? And they invested a ton in a lot of big, hairy tool sets that took a long time to get up and running. And what they didn't do is they didn't think about what question they wanted to ask the data, what use case they wanted to use. And I think the guys are spot on around the capability build. This is real chicken and egg, right? Because in some ways this is a science, right? We call it data science for a reason because we don't always know the answer. So you won't always know the specifics and the minutiae of the use case, but you got to get started, right? So there's got to be some level of investment that says, how do I get that data? How do I harness it? How do I explore it? And then how do I very, very quickly, in an agile way, turn those into many, many projects with real defined benefit? So if it's in a bank, you might start with customer. Then you might move on to something in risk, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think Jessica Hayden, who is involved in the UCD Innovation Academy, told me this fascinating story about, which really identifies how when you're designing, or if you're looking to solve problems, you need to start with the problem first. So in the building of Heathrow Terminal 5, they noticed that there were lots of people who were using the bathrooms, and they looked at the other terminals. They couldn't understand why so many people were using the toilets, and particularly in a certain age group. So it was like 60 plus. They were using the bathroom maybe 4 times an hour, and they couldn't figure out why this was happening in Terminal 5. And of course, without doing proper design-led thinking or using data analytics and looking at the problem properly, you might go, okay, well, just build more toilets. Now, in Terminal 5, that is not what Terminal 5 needs. There's plenty of toilets. So why are so many people going there? And sometimes stats can't give you the answer. Right. So what they did is they put people on the ground and they went into the toilets and followed old people into the toilets in Terminal 5 and said, excuse me, what are you doing here? And they actually managed to get some pretty good answers. And the answer was, you can hear the announcements really well in the toilets. Right. You can't hear them on the floor. Yeah. And so when you're on the floor, it's too much noise, not enough, but when you're there, you can hear exactly what time your flight is happening. So they're going in and checking all the time. Yeah. So rather than build all these really expensive toilets and add on so much more real estate to the place and make an even bigger footprint, been in Terminal 5, it's huge. Yeah. They just had bigger screens, louder announcements, clearer, and they reduced the amount of environmental noise. Yeah. So sometimes the answer is not staring us in the face. Sometimes the question is the wrong question. I think that's one of the real problems with data science, is you think you've got the problem, but identifying the problem first is the problem. Barry.
So, in building that capability, I'm not suggesting that we have a small use case and we should immediately go to using the most expensive tools, or moving all the data into the cloud, or gathering loads of data. When we talk about building a capability, we need to talk about making sure that we have exactly the right people working on the data science team who have those transferable skills, who are customer focused. They're not astrophysicists who've never seen never actually looked at a customer in the eye. And people with experience in marketing or finance or customer service. That's where you need to grow the capability. But really smart people can do data science or do really good analytics with a limited tool set.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think so many organizations, when they think about building their analytics capability, they immediately hone in on, I got to get the best data scientists. Right, and I got to really focus on that skill set with a strong mathematics, with strong, the astrophysics type example. But to really get an analytics project to work, you can't lose the domain knowledge, right? So whether that's really understanding the bank, or it's really understanding the customers, or it's in an airport, understanding the logistics of how an airport runs, unless you can knit that ability to have, and that ability to understand the domain in which you're analyzing in, together with the imagination and creativity skills of a data scientist, it's not really going to work. Right? That's what we do every single day.
So, what are the use cases for big data? Because we've been talking about big data. I want to give people some what we could do with it. So, do each of you have a good example of, in the future, if you did it right, how big data might make our lives a little bit easier, or how it's doing it now?
Yeah. So. I had a conversation with a person last night about what would the future look like if big data were used differently, along the lines of, we need to ensure that big data is benefiting the customer. So currently, you go into the supermarket, you do your weekly shopping, you pay for it, and then you scan your loyalty card. What if you scanned your loyalty card on the way in to allow that supermarket to immediately ping you on their app with the discounts, with that matter to you? So I have a newborn baby in my house, so it would be really good if I immediately saw cheap nappies and baby formula and wine.
Yeah.
I need wine.
Cheap nappies and baby formula
Good
and wine.
combination,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good mix. Yeah.
I think that'd be a good place.
That's a knowing look from one parent's trolley to another parent's trolley.
Yes, but this would turn the use of data in the supermarket on its head,
Yeah.
and it would now show that the supermarket is using my data and everything they know about me to benefit me at exactly the right time.
Yeah.
And that's how it needs to work in banks, in insurance companies, everywhere.
For sure, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
I guess go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I think if you look forward and you look, I think there's kind of much more fundamental things about society that big data can do. And my answer is slightly facetious in some ways. So I think you can ask yourselves, should we replace our politicians with an algorithm? And I
Yes.
think that's a fundamental question.
So what do you mean by that question?
Yeah,
Should
so-
we replace our politician with an algorithm?
So I think to explain that, right, what big data does, it collects loads of data and it runs algorithms that makes decisions based on that data. So if you take a very simple example about the city and you decide you're actually going to collect data about traffic lights or pedestrians, and then you're going to actually dynamically configure the city to suit the traffic that's in it, for example. You could then ask the question, well, why do I need to have a local councillor who's involved in the planning issues who makes those decisions? And ask yourself the question, why should I allow someone to make an uninformed decision when I have the potential to make exceptionally informed decisions? Now, I'm putting that out there. There's two sides to this, without a
So
doubt.
who thinks we should replace our politicians with really smart algorithms? Raise
Or
your hand.
any algorithm.
Oh, so only a few. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So,
But I mean,
so
I
the-
think, sorry.
No, but the Pauric, I just wanted to go to Pauric because you wanted to add there kind of a use case scenario.
I think the politician one's a good example. I wonder what Andy Kenny would think of that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's kind of in theory you think for an algorithm is typically rational, right?
Yeah.
And you assume politics is rational. The biggest thing that'll stop politics being replaced with artificial intelligence is politics.
Yeah.
And for every winner, there's usually two losers. And the fact is that artificial intelligence is not going to make them irrational decisions because it's not designed that way. So unfortunately, it's probably more a pipe dream.
But I do think we will see the increase in kind of data-driven policy making. So while I was kind of, as I said, just joking a bit, I think there are things in the medium term. Though I do want to take you up on your point, which is very interesting. I completely agree with you. For every winner, there's two losers. And I think I was telling you recently, Jonathan, that I read the statistic that if you replace a menial task with kind of big data, algorithmic, automated, for every 5 men's jobs you replace 20 women. So it's very, and that's because a lot of women work in kind of lower paid jobs that are kind of more
So
easily
you're saying
replaceable.
automation by machines is putting 20 women for every 5 men out of a job every time it replaces
I heard
it.
somebody from Microsoft say that the other day, so it must be true.
Okay,
And I think it's a really, really interesting thing. I think nothing's neutral in this world. There are things that'll happen and consequences of it. And I think as people here become data scientists or engage in this world, and as companies engage with it, you need to think of those issues as well.
I think one thing that big data and putting algorithms and machines in the driving seat of making major decisions, which one VC company has done. So there's a VC company in the States that has made an active board member an artificial intelligence algorithm that they wrote.
Yeah.
So it has a vote on the board on which companies it involves in, because they said, look, we realize the power of this sort of analysis. They haven't given it, veto control. They haven't made it CEO, but they're now bringing machines into that decision-making process. But of course, that comes at a cost as well, doesn't it? Because if we are, like, for a bank, or if you're selling to customers and you are heavily reliant on algorithms, the people who lie outside this large middle gap of most customers get screwed, don't they?
Well, look, I think there's probably a couple of ways of thinking about that. I mean, you just need, I actually looked at last week and the fall in sterling as actually a phenomenal example of kind of...
The algorithmic glitch.
An algorithm, glitch, I mean, but automated trading, right? So there's an industry that's been completely turned on its head, where you had a lot of traders, with their chalkboards, look at prices and kind of make decisions. And now we've got, masses of algorithms and computers that essentially the investment managers, the big investment managers like BlackRock and others will use to make decisions and trades, and it's split-second stuff. And what happened last week with the fall of sterling, I can imagine, is that those rules and algorithms hit certain thresholds, and then everyone started to dump at a certain time, and suddenly you had a flash crash. Now, I actually think this is a spectrum, right? So we can get really, really scared about everything moving to one end of the spectrum, which says the computers are going to take over and the machines are going to take over. The other end is we say...
I was waiting. It took us quite a long time till we got to the sentence, the machines are going to take over. But we got there, folks.
But I think what actually is going to happen is we're going to land somewhere in between, right? And if you take an area like medicine and cancer research, we've got some phenomenal examples of artificial intelligence programs with what IBM are doing with Watson around cancer research and artificial intelligence being an aid for the doctor, not replacing the doctor, but just aid them to make a better decision, right? So the long term might be the machines may take over more. I think that's much further away than anyone actually believes.
Do people remember the flash crash? 2011, billions wiped off the stock market. No one really knows why. This is as a result of an algorithm written by a trader in the UK. He's currently being tried in America. So in 2011, this algorithm was written. It was a bit of a glitch. It was introduced into the stock market, and what happens nowadays, if you remember Trading Places, that movie with that RTE played every Christmas for like decades because they couldn't afford to pay for any of the film. That one with Eddie Murphy in it. So if you might remember the people with the caps and the yellow jackets trading on the floor, that happens still, but to a much lesser extent, particularly when it comes to micro trading. So these small transactions that happen on the floor, and this algorithm. It did something wrong, and it caused everybody to sell at the wrong time, and people to buy at the wrong time, and billions, like people's entire pensions were wiped out because someone put a dash where it should have been a slash, and when I spoke to one of the guys who examined this from a scientific point of view, he said, we have no idea how to unravel that, because if you start with one transaction and you multiply it by 20 billion in the space of could be 10 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah, there can be kind of emergent behavior as well that kind of you can't actually model.
You can't model it because it's explosion and you can't dial it back. So that could happen again. There's no one looking after. That terrifies me. So that's a bad side of big data. But like you talked about health, I mean, presumably there's huge opportunities in health when we look at, for example, the 10,000 Genome Project in the UK, where they're trying to get all of this information online. What's happening at the NHS? They're working with IBM. IBM's Watson using smart AI to look at health patterns to see if they can identify therapies or genes that might be targets.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're already seeing that. I mean, people now have got devices in their homes. The cost of these devices are coming way down. So I think there's going to, big data is delivering a lot of value in that now people can check their bloods, can check if they're diabetic, can monitor some of their key vitals, their key health KPIs. A lot of people maybe avoided going to the doctor because they didn't have time, or they were putting it off, or like especially in the US market, it's very expensive to go. So now I think what you're seeing is that type of diagnosis at home that's been enabled by data and computing power also be able to do that on a device. I think that's a huge advancement, and going to be healthcare is going to be one of the biggest wins.
So even in healthcare, I mean, the data science, the algorithm is going to explore the data and look for patterns. The data scientist's job is to interpret that. And the statistician's job has always been to interpret that. And the data scientist, one of the fundamental roles in data science that people don't often talk about is storytelling. The ability to reduce the complexity of all of that noise that's happening down to a story that wins the hearts and minds of board members, of decision makers in companies. In the very same way in healthcare, the data scientist in a health informatics setting is analyzing that, interpreting it, reducing the complexity and developing treatments in the same way as me as a data scientist in the bank develop treatments for customers. We use the very same terminology.
I know, Pauric, we've been speaking offline about this, so I want to go back to it. But just out of interest, who here would be happy to share their personal health data with the HSE? Just raise your hand to benefit treatments and to possibly identify, like your genome or whatever. Would you raise your hand?
Yep.
Okay, it's interesting because they're facing a challenge at the moment where they're trying to get people to share their public data. But we've been told non-stop, and I've said it as a broadcaster so many times, don't share your data, don't share your data. And I was like, please share your data. Wait, what? Your most personal data. What? So it's an interesting challenge.
It's about trust, Jonathan.
It is about trust.
It's always about trust.
But I think the interesting thing, and I mean, when I say that, give this example, I am really, I'm an engineer. I'm interested in technology and its progress, but it just depends on the level. So I use sometimes an example of a Fitbit. So you can use the Fitbit information to motivate yourself, which is grand. You can competitively use it to motivate teams of people. It can feed into your insurance policy in the future, and it does in some cases now already with kind of individualized ones. But I've heard people, I saw some very good articles in The Guardian last year about how that can maybe also influence what social welfare payments you get. Like you're a big fat lazy slob, so we're not actually going to give you these social welfare payments. Yeah. Now that hasn't happened.
So basically, if you're on social welfare, like the real scary 1984 scenario is, if you're on social welfare, you have to wear a Fitbit, and if you don't move 14 kilometers every week, you're not getting your social welfare.
Again, this was an article that was speculating, but I think that's both the power and the challenge of data. So the power is you take something and you start off measuring it. Like we measure trees to know how fast they're growing and when you should cut them down, with a company that we work with called Metrics, but they also measure that because to do with kind of pension funds. So you start off measuring something, and you measure it for a very simple reason, like the temperature, and then when it goes up the chain, you can actually use that measurement for some totally different thing you didn't think about. And that's both wonderful and fantastic because it just cracks open these amazing things like the correlations you saw in Heathrow, but it's also kind of frightening, and it's to do with so I would like to give my information to the health organizations, but only for specific purposes, and not to draw any subsequent conclusions about me.
I mean, the easy solution to that problem is just tie your Fitbit to your dog, right?
Or just go like this when you're watching TV.
Yeah, although your heart rate seems to be 3 times.
But I think as an industry, we need to do a better job of selling the value of data, the value of the analytics that's going on. Because it's classic, right? Society, bad news travels better than good news.
You're absolutely right.
And what happens is things like the Target story in the US, where they started advertising to a teenager who was pregnant before she knew she was pregnant, or her parents knew she was pregnant.
Oh God!
Like, that was bad. The flash crash was a bad story. We don't find it as easy to get out there that now people are living longer because of health analytics.
Did that actually happen, by the way? Target advertised to a teenager that was already pregnant. She didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't hear that story.
Or at least, I'm not sure before she knew that she was pregnant, but certainly before her parents knew.
All right,
and
okay.
So they started getting all this advertising material coming in, and they started asking the questions.
I see, okay.
So all of the privacy concerns that we have about our data, that paranoia is born out of stories just like that.
It's not paranoia.
Customers are being led to believe that there's only ever a cynical use for collecting data.
Yeah, sure.
So something that's quite topical at the moment is the use of smart metering data. So 1,000 houses in Ireland were part of the smart metering trial. Their energy usage is clocked every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
The data protection commissioners of Europe have got together and said energy companies should not be given access to that 15-minute, quarter-hourly data.
Right.
Because what they will probably do is figure out what time you're going to be home at so that they can phone you and sell you something.
Yeah.
And it's that type of cynicism about data that means the energy industry doesn't have that data to actually perform so good, like reminding you that you left your immersion heater on.
Yeah.
But
which they could do.
I think we're facing, I think you mentioned it earlier on, there's potentially a bigger backlash coming when we do talk about privacy, when we do see all the things that are going on at the moment with people starting to now understand an awful lot more the value of their data and what they're really handing over to the Facebooks, the LinkedIn, the Googles of this world. And it's going to be something very interesting on the horizon for the big data story, I would say, is will that backlash slow it down, right? So will that backlash around privacy, where people start to opt out an awful lot more, or they move away from social media, or they don't share as much, will that slow down the journey a little bit? And I personally, I think the analytics story isn't going away. Some of the big data and the engagement and the privacy around social media might slow down some of the bigger themes an awful lot more than we expect.
We've got a few minutes left. Are there questions from the audience on this topic? I thought there might be. Yeah, if we can get a microphone, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. This is something I talk about a lot in my program. I'm fascinated by the whole thing. I'm fascinated by what data, what data can bring us, and also the dangers of all this data floating around. All right, let's get this gentleman here.
I'm a student of NCI College, so we're in first year doing computing science.
Yep.
So we just want to, I just want to ask a question if there's any advice that you can give to us to get into the database, the business.
Okay, so opportunities in data science. You probably all have something to say, so make it snappy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a massively growing profession. It's here to stay. Invest in it now. Give it a crack. Don't lose the fact that you're going to work in a domain, though, right? So don't overly focus on the technical skills. The storytelling, the ability to work with people, the ability to solve problems are all as important.
Yeah, and also, if you like a particular, you might be a big data science nerd, but you might also love football or ballet or whatever it is. If there's something, find a way of marrying those two, because it seems like everyone in every industry is looking at data and how they can use data better for their business.
Yeah.
So I'm in the telecoms and networking side of things, and if I had a cent for every time someone said they wanted big data in one of the projects, I'd be really wealthy. And I would just say in a general sense that you might see an area like telecoms and think that's not for me. We're in Connect, in the centre I work with, looking for big data or data scientists at the moment, so send us your CV. Is one quick answer, but I agree with Jonathan completely. It is everywhere, and going back to your comments about creativity, which are really, really important, it's the people who understand the domain and have the science and can bring it together are the people with the power.
Pauric?
Yeah, I really want to second a lot of the comments that the folks just said. Find that area, that domain that you're interested in, and cross it over. And there's lots of open data out there. It might be messy. The reality is when you're inside companies, data is messy. Start working with, start combining it. Quick example, I just saw last week, and I haven't met the guy, but he was studying I think it was DCU, and he was interested in GAA. Big question going on in GAA is Dublin getting too much money in the GAA?
No, it's the answer. You don't need it. We don't need big data for that.
We don't need data for that. So he
More
crunches
people.
some data, works out that Dublin's getting €274 per player, per member that's registered, whereas every other county is getting something like €50. He brought data to it, he sparked a debate. Hey, I'm sure there's lots of companies out there looking to hire him because he's told a story.
Yeah.
And it was a great example, so look for things like that.
That's interesting, yeah. So that basically, because when I talk about broadcasting, people say, how do I get into broadcasting? I say, start doing it today.
Yeah.
Start writing, start blogging, start doing your own podcast. And the more you do it, practice makes perfect. So if you're into this, find stuff that you're interested in and use your curiosity and use your talents to sort of dissect it from a data science point of view. Barry?
There are some excellent Kaggle competitions out there.
Yep.
And even if you don't do the Kaggle, the competition part of it, take the data, go home, just do it. Look for organizations, like there's lots of OR meetups, go to them. You might not be particularly interested in OR, but you're going to meet some amazing people, and it's a brilliant way of networking, finding out what other people are working on. And the last thing I'll say is there's an organization called DataKind who take social problems, they get together for a meetup for a weekend, and they solve a problem using data science.
Wow. What are they called?
DataKind.
DataKind.
Yeah, it's a worldwide organization, not for profit, and good fun.
Okay, lots of people hitting the pen. That's a really
And
cool.
now-
That's a really cool idea.
And
So,
just on Kaggle, just plug, we've got a competition up there, so it's definitely a good one to go and try out.
yeah. So Pauric is from
Thanks.
Pramerica. Just we'll get you to run through because I know you've all said some of your CV, just so people know who's who in a bit. But yeah, I think there's lots of these sort of. I actually hosted a hackathon. I know AIB are doing it, Bank of Ireland do it, DCU are doing it, and I went to this and I was like, who the hell is actually going to turn up to a bank hackathon? The place was packed, and it was brilliant. It was really smart people
think it's a
getting
fantastic-
together and trying to fix or look at data and try and do something interesting with it. So,
It's a great
sometimes
area
the
for starting
challenge,
your own
not the
company.
problem.
yeah, and you know
Start
what?
your own company.
You might go there and decide you set your own company up.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have any more questions from the floor? We just have time. This gentleman here and then this gentleman there. Do we have any ladies with questions?
I think.
You're a gentleman, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, this gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Mayo. I go to the same college as this
Okay.
idiot right here. Yeah, just messing. He's an amazing guy.
Okay.
You mentioned the algorithm wiping out over $1 billion in the stock market.
Yeah.
Do you not think that the government should somehow regulate AI to like stop it from like doing what happened at that time?
Sure, I think they should try, but like in most industries, the regulation, particularly when you talk about like the AI is moving at a blistering speed. Everyone you speak to go, I didn't realize we could do that. I mean, there's a story yesterday about what Google is doing. Regulation is going to be really, really tricky. But I think in the financial markets, when it comes to that sort of, I think absolutely, and I think they are looking at finding a way of doing it.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky ask though. If you've got an open market, having someone regulate that because of AI. But I think the amount of time transactions you can do in a millisecond is something that they're looking at.
Yeah.
We don't have a huge amount. I do want to get to some questions from people from the audience. So Owen, if you don't mind, this lady here, and then we'll go to that gentleman there. So if you can pass that, and there should be another microphone. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Hi, hello. I work as a data analyst. So what I understand about the big data is, like you said, found patterns from data set. But more important is to predict, to use historical data to predict future things, like how to help companies get more customers, get more revenues. Do you agree with me?
So the question was, we've been talking about what they can do, but actually the predictive power of big data is really important. I think so too. Interesting though that you finished with, my use case is how to get companies to make more money. Well, I suppose yes, that is definitely one. But also like people can benefit too. So, do you want to pitch in on that, Owen?
I think like again, you got to have an objective when you're doing a data analytics project or a big data project. So one might be to increase revenue. So I'm going to target a different segment of the market by predicting with the data I have that market is most attractive for me. But there's other objectives of analytics projects. Some could be I want to manage risk better, right? So the organization could be exposed to fraud risk. They could be exposed to credit risk in financial services. So again, how do we use predictive models to predict when Owen's not going to pay his loan back? To predict when one of the guys might commit a fraud, even though they never would, obviously. But there's so much power and so many use cases for analytics. But it's back to what we started this panel with: is you got to ask the right question and you got to have that right objective in mind.
You might know the answer to the name of this. There's a particular phenomenon in banks that is that there are way more ones than there are nines at the beginning of your bank balance. So I don't know if you've heard this, right? What's it called?
Benford's Law.
Benford's Law, yeah. So, one of the ways that companies view big data is they've looked at people's bank accounts. If they see like there's not as many ones as there should be, and there's a bit too many nines and eights, it looks like fraud. And that's actually how some banks are actually investigating fraud. They're looking at these sort of patterns that should be there. Linda, yeah.
People are doing all sorts of interesting things now in predicting disease. So smart agriculture is a huge area to Ireland, and I've come across a startup recently, and they tried to predict when the crop needs to get fertilized in a different way. You've predicted flooding. Flooding is a huge interest, and all of those things. And what's really exciting about those is the mixture of different data types, different sources, policy making, politics and science. And I think it's a really exciting kind of world to be in.
Okay. We're going to finish up on this question. So what's your question?
So my question is just on the line between getting accurate and specific data mining versus privacy concerns. How do you best get around that? Do you write an algorithm to put some noise on the data, or do you pick a large sample mean of like user data, or is there another way?
Maybe Pauric might be one of the better places.
Yeah, great question, and one that we face a lot. Typically, we try to keep the granularity to not go any granular than, say, groups of 100 people, ballpark, it depends on the problem. And that way you're protecting the privacy of the individual. What you typically find is, even though people think you get really granular, getting more granular than that usually doesn't deliver that much additional business dollar revenue. So typically what I've seen companies try to stay away from that, and I know we would be very conscious of making sure that we're not getting into that level of detail. And so customers, we can build trust over time, which ultimately we're in the insurance industry. It's an entire industry built on trust. So we got to make sure our data science reflects that.
So it's a large sample mean of like users as opposed to
Yes.
putting noise on the data.
Barry?
For the most part.
Delivering on this notion of a segment of one doesn't necessarily mean we need to analyze every single customer. It is about segmenting your customers in a really meaningful way, yet keeping those segments large enough so they make commercial sense. I mean, I'd be fired in the morning if I went into the bank and said, I've come up with 2,000 new segments. That'd be nonsense. It's completely unmanageable.
Okay. I'd like to end on something less technical, just to give that fist to the sky inspirational talk end. So, big data, your thoughts for the future. Like, what do you think? Anyone can jump in on this. Clutch your straws. Big data, where do you think it'll end in the future? Like, what do you think the most potential is for this particular technology in the near future?
I think we'll see, as I said before, the hype start to move away from it and the value starting to be created, right? So this is here to stay. It's not going away. There's no doubt about that. I think people will start to understand that actually small data has as much benefit, and they'll start to open their eyes to actually being able to analyze an awful lot better and get value.
Okay.
And then for industries, I would say healthcare is where it's really at in terms of the value we're going to get back for diagnostics and disease.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
And I think it's the start of the second industrial revolution in many ways. So I think we're going to have a lot better productivity.
Time?
I think if you think about the world's going to make much better use of its natural resources because things like food, people's going to live longer. I think ultimately we're going to move to a better world in, say, 40, 50 years. And that was enabled by the first industrial revolution. And I think this is very much the start of the second one. And over time, I think people will realize that, but we're kind of living through it now, and you usually don't realize it until hindsight, so we'll get there.
That's a great way to finish it. Saving people's lives, living a better world. That's exactly what I was looking for. Please give our panel a big round of applause, please. And I want to just point out who we have, so if you want to go find them. Eoin is from EY. I think they have a stand here
There's
somewhere.
a small one over there,
I think it's somewhere around here. If you look hard, you might find it. Linda Doyle is from Trinity College Dublin. You can just approach her. She's very approachable. Pauric is from Pramerica, and we've Barry, who's from Bank of Ireland. Bank of Ireland also have us. They're somewhere around here. Thanks very much for our panel. I'll see you in about an hour's time.